In 1948, when the Constitution of India was being framed and the values of pluralism were being discussed, one social reform became a bone of contention. It divided the Constituent Assembly. They debated for months but could not reach a consensus, and finally they compromised. Do you know what this compromise was over? The Uniform Civil Code, UCC, one civil code common to all. It would have meant the abolition of personal laws. What are personal laws? Laws based on one's scriptures, religious texts. They regulated almost every aspect of life: marriage, divorce, inheritance, adoption, guardianship, everything. A lot of these laws were discriminatory, unfair to minority groups and women. The Sharia law had provisions that deprived women of inheritance. Certain Hindu customs deprived women of remarriage. So what the Constituent Assembly wanted was to abolish or limit such laws. They wanted to govern India by a constitution so that the same laws apply equally to all citizens, irrespective of their religion, sex, gender, or sexual orientation. One nation, one law. That was the objective. But it was not to be. The Uniform Civil Code was not adopted in the Constitution. Why? You see, India was a diverse and vast country, a conscious chaos of religions, ethnicities, customs, and social structures. To unify such a country under one law was seen as a fiendishly tough task at that time. Plus, there was immense opposition to a Uniform Civil Code from both sides: Islamic fundamentalists and Orthodox Hindus. They wanted the Sharia and Shastras to determine personal laws. They feared a Uniform Civil Code would open a Pandora's box. It would diminish their authority. So they called it a threat to religious freedom. They issued warnings of social unrest in the country. The founding fathers of India's constitution retreated. They made the proposal optional, a directive principle in Article 44. This is what it said: the state shall endeavour to secure for the citizens a uniform civil code throughout the territory of India. So the Uniform Civil Code remained a dead letter. They decided to implement it when India was ready to accept it. 7 decades have passed. It's still a proposal and still controversial. Is it time for India to have a uniform civil code, one law for all citizens? Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, and I come to you with arguably the most contentious concept in modern Indian history, a concept to govern India under one law. First things first, what is a uniform civil code? One law for one nation. Historians say its origins can be traced back to the Romans. They governed themselves based on a civil law, not holy texts. The Mesopotamians did the same. They followed the code of Ur-Nammu, apparently the oldest law code in history. It encouraged people to think of themselves as one family with one set of rules. The US Constitution is another example. It says all men are created equal. Mind the patriarchy, that's a discussion for another day. Now imagine if Thomas Jefferson had said that only white men are created equal. American history would have been different. But it's not. American law treats all citizens as equal, and all of them must follow the same law. Well, that's not the case in India. Laws here are based on religion, caste, culture, even geography, especially when it comes to property and inheritance rights. Case in point, Northeast India, states like Nagaland, Meghalaya, and Mizoram. They're not governed by mainstream laws. They make their own personal laws based on their customs and practices, no matter how archaic they may be. And these laws are said to preserve the peculiar cultures of these states. Then we come to religion. Certain personal laws for Muslims in India are determined by the Quran. They're mostly related to marriage, divorce, inheritance, and custody of children. A woman's right to alimony is determined as per the Sharia. So is a woman's right to inheritance of property, even her right to adopt a child. And all of this leaves women at the mercy of the Muslim Personal Law Board, a body run mostly by men and influenced by clerics. The British supported its formation. Why? To divide and rule, to keep India segregated into watertight compartments. Think about it. If different communities had different rules, there would be friction, divisions, and the British would use it to their advantage. Unfortunately for India, this continued even after independence, and not for lack of trying. From Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to Jawaharlal Nehru, they all wanted to get rid of personal laws and bring a civil code. Ambedkar, in fact, was the strongest proponent of it. Here's what he said in a Constituent Assembly debate: I personally do not understand why religion should be given this vast, expansive jurisdiction so as to cover the whole of life and to prevent the legislature from encroaching upon that field. After all, what are we having this liberty for? We are having this liberty in order to reform our social system, which is so full of inequities and discriminations, which conflict with our fundamental rights. It is therefore quite impossible for anybody to conceive that the personal law shall be excluded from the jurisdiction of the state. And Nehru agreed with all of this. But he feared a civil strife. He felt Muslims who had stayed back in India after partition would feel insecure if a civil code were to be introduced immediately. So he said the reform had his quote-unquote extreme sympathy, but the time was not ripe for it. Allow me to quote, "I want to prepare the ground for it, and this kind of thing is one method of preparing the ground." This kind of thing, he said. What was he referring to? The Hindu Code Bills. These were several laws passed in the 1950s to codify and reform the Hindu personal law. Certain personal laws were abolished. Nehru said this was the first step towards bringing a uniform civil code. But that's where it remained. In the 1980s, it gained momentum again, courtesy the Shah Bano case. A woman appealed for justice after being divorced by her husband. She'd been married for 40 years. Then the husband left her and refused to pay alimony. According to the Muslim law, she was entitled to only 3 months of alimony. 3 months after 40 years of marriage. So she went to the Supreme Court. The court ruled in her favor. Shah Bano was awarded maintenance. Muslim clerics and politicians protested. They said this verdict was in conflict with Islamic law. They took to the streets. They asked for the verdict to be nullified. Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. His government brought a legislation, the Muslim Women Protection Act of 1986. It overturned the Supreme Court's verdict. It restricted the rights of Muslim women to alimony for only 90 days. The debate over a uniform civil code became more intense. The Supreme Court of India said a common civil code will help the cause of national integration by removing desperate loyalties to laws that have conflicting ideologies. This was 3 decades back. Since then, there have been many Shah Banos, many court battles over personal law, many petitions for a uniform civil code, but no government has been able to implement it. In election after election, the Bharatiya Janata Party has promised it. In the 2019 manifesto, the BJP promised to include the best provisions of different personal laws from different religions. They've been in power for 8 years. They still say they're committed to the UCC, but they've not been able to implement it yet. Critics say this is a move against secularism, that it would target India's Muslims. Political and religious groups, even tribal communities from the Northeast, are against it. They say it's a conspiracy to impose majority Hindu views over minorities. The proponents of the Uniform Civil Code do not agree. They say it will only bring uniformity, uplift women and oppressed religious communities. They point towards the state of Goa. It's the only Indian state with a uniform civil code. You see, while the British ruled the rest of India, Goa was under Portuguese control until 1961. They introduced a civil code applicable to all. It is still in force. Then you have some Islamic countries that have reformed personal laws to check their misuse, like Turkey, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, Jordan. They've all codified personal laws as per their constitution. Turkey and Tunisia have abolished polygamy. Jordan and Egypt have banned triple talaq. If Muslim countries can reform personal laws, if Western democracies can follow a common civil code, why then are Indians living under laws passed before independence? The question is more legal than political. And it's not that there aren't orthodox practices in other religions. There are biases in personal laws of every faith in India. Laws pertaining to succession among Hindus are unequal. Laws pertaining to inheritance among Christians are lopsided. Even Sikhs, Jains and Parsis are governed by the same laws as Hindus, no matter how distinct their practices and cultures are. Is it time to put an end to all of this? To unite India under one law? Well, it makes all the sense. But it remains controversial because of its misuse by religious forces, its misinterpretation by politicians. The way to do it is build consensus, bring experts from all communities and faiths together, draw from the best of their traditions and practices, make them applicable for modern times, and unite them under one civil code. It's about time we did this.